Ministry of Home Affairs said, no, we can't do that. It would mean that we distrust our administrators, our bureaucrats. You can't have that. So now, the district magistrate, the superintendent of police and the district forest officers are the three who control the disbursement of integrated action plan funds. Okay? So you have already tweaked the Forest Rights Act and other acts. It's in these conditions these wars are taking place. So when in looking at wars, we are not just looking at how they fight. Yes, it's of much interest how they fight, and I'll come to that issue later. But it's also interesting why these wars are taking place. Because then we understand the politics of it and what it aims to achieve. Of course, wars in India are different kinds of wars and different levels of wars are being framed. I have not even talked about here, I am talking only about armed conflict. There is another war which is being fought in the name of fighting terror, which through an act called Unlawful Activities Prevention Act 1967 in India, which has been modified many times over and which has incorporated all the provisions, draconian provisions of TADA and POTA, earlier draconian acts, is one of the biggest threats to us because it completely, its impact is such that it creates a crime. I mean, this is something which is brought out also by this book that I'm reading, The New Jim Crow, which brings out how the drug war, the declaration of drug war. At a time, I mean, on the eve of drug war, only 2% of crimes were apparently where drug figured as in any way. So it was hardly anything. Once the drug war began, you created a crime and you see a proliferation of incidents and offenders. This is exactly the same thing Unlawful Activities Prevention Act does. So for instance, just to give you an example, and to complete the story and move on to the last section, let's look at what happens to Student Islamic Movement of India. Okay, 2001 September 11 happened on 27th September of 2001. Then party in power, NDA, with LK Advani as the Home Minister, they declared the SIMI is a banned organization. Now, until then, the unlawful, I'm sorry I'm going to bore you with some of legalese, but please hang on with me because it's very important. You must know the nature of the beast in order to be able to, in order to think in terms of solutions or how to overcome it. We must know. So, SIMI. So, in 27 September 2001, they declared it.
What is the reason?
Until then, they cite the reason. This is also really brilliant. All they come out with is a single page Gazette notification saying that our suspicion is that SIMI is engaged in supporting the Kashmiri Muslims, that they support jihad, etc., etc. Now, until 2001, the only reason for banning an organization is if you preach secession. Okay. So they tried to bring in rope in SIMI because there was no other law. They tried to rope in SIMI because the intention was to ban SIMI. So they brought it under by saying that they had supported jihad in Kashmir and that they were implicated in providing material and moral support for the secessionist movement in Kashmir. Many of us do it. I do it. It's not as if SIMI was the only one. And even if we did it, heavens wouldn't have fallen if they had continued to do it. I mean, it's hardly anything. Why should we not support the right of self-determination of Kashmiri people? I mean, one should ask this question. Why is it the Indians are not supporting that? I mean, my distress is that not more Indians are supporting rather than why few Indians are doing it. Anyway, so they were roped in and they were banned. Until then, there was not a single criminal case which had reached the stage of conviction anywhere against any member of SIMI. The only cases which were registered against SIMI until then, 2001, were where they clashed with Bajrang Dal and other Hindu right-wing elements. And of course, the Indian peculiarity of Indian law is that whereas the Muslims were charge sheeted, the Hindu Bajrang Dal and RSS escaped. This is also a peculiarity of majoritarian Indian state. It would be like Afro-Americans here perhaps, an equivalent situation. So this is what happened. So until 2001 there were hardly any cases, no convictions had taken place. So there was not even an history that one could say and the government could provide by saying that, you know, SIMI is a dangerous organization, it has committed these kind of crimes, etc., etc. Whatever they were preaching, I mean, is nothing very different from what RSS or others. I mean, if the worst comes to worst, even if they wanted to establish Nizam-e-Mustafa in India, so what? It's their right to preach what they believe in and propagate what they believe in. At that level, why should there be a problem? And in fact, one would argue that as long as it's in public domain, it's still possible to engage with them, dialogue, have conversation, right? By banning them, what you did is drove them inside. But there was a much more serious one. One, as I said, exactly like the drug war, you now created a crime. You declared that since SIMI is banned, anybody associated with it, and anyone who remotely espouses the same ideas that SIMI does. So SIMI became a generic name for anyone who spoke out in favor of Muslim assertion in India. Okay? And this was enabled by a law. If drug war enabled it for the Afro-Americans and resulted and helped in mass incarceration, then in India, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, insofar as the Muslims are concerned, has done more or less the same thing. We may not have reached. I mean, Indians, probably right-wing Indians, lament the fact that we don't have 2 million in prisons and that we have far too few in Indian prisons, and they would probably like to compete with United States of America to probably have 20 million in competition, you know. But that's a separate issue. But the point is, what it does is that it completely criminalizes a large part of legitimate activities that even the Constitution and we are told that we all enjoy. Now the reason I'm saying is that there are different levels at which wars are being fought. So the war against terror takes one shape. Armed conflict, it takes another shape, where there are armed clashes. But it makes a difference also for us to look closely at wars to understand who's fighting it, what are the specificities of it to also understand, because one of the arguments, one of the important things that we have to keep in mind is that why is it that, quite apart from the fact that people are forced to pick up, or situations are created where they feel compelled that they have no choice but to pick up weapons to defend themselves. It's the right of self-preservation and right of self-defense. I mean, an Adivasi whose land or his forest is going to be taken over by a big corporate for mining, and his livelihood and his life is going to be destroyed because of it and for future generations, obviously he or she will pick up and fight. So that itself is not surprising. What is that every movement and every war that has taken place in India also throws up different social realities. Like the war that was fought in Kashmir is different from the nature from what is happening in Operation Greenland area. Not in terms of the state's response, but I'm talking in terms of the rebels, the militants, the so-called militants, the insurgents. We have to also understand, because it's very important to understand also those who have been turned into enemy. Because once you are turned into enemy, you are demonized by media. If you look at Times Now, for instance, they have 2 series called Red Thunder 1 and 2. Please check it out. Then you get an idea about how pernicious and how the nature of propaganda and the clamor for more harsh measures. We pride ourselves in a very non-violent country. I mean, there is no other country which is more violent than India. There is no civilization which has been as unequal and as violent as Indian civilization, which is also a fact. We fear, we do not want to confront certain realities, at least in India. But it's a fact that we have to confront ourselves. In this situation, it matters why people are fighting, how they are fighting, and what does it reflect about their politics. wars also become a way in which you understand the nature of the struggle and the resistance and the way in which. Because if they were just rabble-rousers, if these were just people who were interested in picking up guns for the heck of it and kill for the heck of it, that would be one thing. That would be thirsting for bloodthirsty. Revenge also dies down. I mean, you're motivated by revenge, you want to take revenge for somebody who's been killed close to you, fine. But how long does